Open Stax Psychology Chapter 9 continued. Section 9.3 Stages of Development. From the moment we are born until the moment we die, we continue to develop. As discussed at the beginning of this chapter, development psychologists often divide our development into three areas: physical development, cognitive development, and psychosocial development. Mirroring Erickson's stages, lifespan development is divided into different stages that are based on age. We will discuss prenatal, infant, child, adolescent, and adult development. Prenatal development. How did you come to be who you are? From beginning as a one-cell structure to your birth, your prenatal development occurred in an orderly and delicate sequence. There are three stages of prenatal development: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. Let's take a look at what happens in developing baby in each of these stages. Germinal stages, week 1 to 2. In the discussion of biopsychology earlier in the book, you learned about genetics and DNA. A mother's and father's DNA is passed on to the child at the moment of conception. Conception occurs when sperm fertilizes an egg and forms a zygote. A zygote begins as a one-cell structure that is created when a sperm and egg merge. The genetic makeup and sex of the baby are set at this point. During the first week after conception, the zygote divides and multiplies, going from one cell structure to 2 cells, then 4 cells, then 8, and so on. This process of cell division is called mitosis. Mitosis is a fragile process. Fewer than 1/2 of all zygotes survive beyond the first 2 weeks. After 5 days of mitosis, there are 100 cells, and after 9 months, there are billions of cells. As the cells divide, they become more specialized, forming different organs and body parts. In the germinal stage, the mass of cells has yet to attach itself to the lining of the mother's uterus. Once it does, the next stage begins. Embryonic stages, weeks 3 to 8. After the zygote divides for about 7 to 10 days and has 150 cells, it travels down the fallopian tubes and implants itself in the lining of the uterus. Upon implantation, this multicellular organism is called an embryo. Now blood vessels grow, forming the placenta. The placenta is a structure connected to the uterus that provides nourishment and oxygen from the mother to the development embryo. Via the umbilical cord, basic structure of the embryo starts to develop into areas that will become the head, chest, and abdomen. During the embryonic stage, the heart begins to beat and organs form and begin to function. The neural tube forms along the back of the embryo, developing into the spinal cord and brain. Fetal stages, weeks 9 through 40. When the organism is about 9 weeks old, the embryo is called a fetus. At this stage, the fetus is about the size of a kidney bean and begins to take on the recognizable form of a human being as the tail begins to disappear. From 9 to 12 weeks, the sex organs begin to differentiate. At about 16 weeks, the fetus is approximately 4.5 inches long. Fingers and toes are fully developed and fingerprints are visible. By the time the fetus reaches the 6th month of development, 24 weeks, it weighs up to 1.4 pounds. Hearing has developed so the fetus can respond to sounds. The internal organs such as the lungs, hearts, stomach, and intestines have formed enough that a fetus born prematurely at this point has a chance to survive outside of the mother's womb. Throughout the fetal stages, the brain continues to grow and develop, nearly doubling in size from weeks 16 to 28. Around 36 weeks, the fetus is almost ready for birth. It weighs about 6 pounds and is about 18.5 inches long. And by week 37, all of the fetus's organs systems are developed enough that it could survive outside the mother's uterus without many of the risks associated with premature birth. The fetus continues to gain weight and grow in length until approximately 40 weeks. By then, the fetus has very little room to move around and birth becomes imminent. The progression through the stages is shown in figure 9.8. Prenatal influence. During each prenatal stage, genetic and environmental factors can affect development. The developing fetus is completely dependent on the mother for life. It is important that the mother takes good care of herself and receives prenatal care, which is medical care during pregnancy that monitors the health of both the mother and the fetus. According to the National Institutes of Health, routine prenatal care is important because it can reduce the risk of complications to the mothers and fetus during pregnancy. In fact, women who are trying to become pregnant or who may become pregnant should discuss pregnancy planning with their doctor. They may be advised, for example, to take a vitamin containing folic acid, which helps prevent certain birth defects, or to monitor aspects of their diet or exercise routines. Recall that when zygotes attach to the wall of the mother's uterus, the placenta is formed. The placenta provides nourishment and oxygen to the fetus. Most everything the mother ingests, including food, liquid, and even medication, travels through the placenta to fetus. Hence the common phrase, eating for two. Anything the mother is exposed to in an environment affects the fetus. If the mother is exposed to something harmful, the child can show lifelong effects. A teratogen is an environmental agent, biological, chemical, or physical, that causes damage to the developing embryo or fetus. There are different types of teratogens. Alcohol and most drugs cause the placenta and affect the fetus. Cross the placenta and affect the fetus. Alcohol is not safe to drink in any amounts during pregnancy. Alcohol use during pregnancy has been found to be the leading preventable cause of mental retardation in children in the U.S. Excessive maternal drinking while pregnant can cause fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, with lifelong consequences for the child, ranging in severity from minor to major. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders are a collection of birth defects associated with heavy consumptions of alcohol during pregnancy. Physically, children with FASD may have a small head size and abnormal facial features. Cognitively, these children may have poor judgment, poor impulse control, higher rates of ADHD, learning issues, and lower IQ scores. These developmental problems and delays persist into adulthood. Based on studies conducted on animals, it also has been suggested that a mother's alcohol consumption during pregnancy may predispose her child to like alcohol. Smoking is also considered a teratogen because nicotine travels through the placenta to the fetus. When the mother smokes, the developing baby experiences a reduction in blood oxygen levels. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, smoking while pregnant can result in premature birth, low birth weight infants, stillbirths, and sudden infant death syndrome. Heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, almost all prescription medicines, and most over-the-counter medications are also considered teratogens. Babies born with a heroin addiction need heroin just like an adult addict. The child will need to be gradually weaned from the heroin under medical supervision. Otherwise, the child could have seizures and die. Other teratogens include radiation, viruses such as HIV and herpes, and Ebola. Women in the U.S. are much less likely to be afflicted with rubella because most women received childhood immunizations or vaccines that protect the body from disease. Each organ of the fetus develops during a specific period in the pregnancy, called the critical or sensitive period. For example, research with primate models of FASD has demonstrated that the time during which a developing fetus is exposed to alcohol can dramatically affect the appearance of facial characteristics associated with fetal alcohol syndrome. Specifically, this research suggests that alcohol exposure is limited to day 19 or 20 of gestation, can lead to significant facial abnormalities of the offspring. Given regions of the brain also show sensitive periods during which they are most susceptible to the teratonicc effects of alcohol. Infancy through childhood. The average newborn weighs approximately 7.5 pounds. Although small, a newborn is not completely helpless because his reflexes and sensory capacities help him interact with the environment from the moment of birth. All healthy babies are born with newborn reflexes, inborn automatic responses to particular forms of stimulation. Reflexes help the newborn survive until it is capable of more complex behaviors. These reflexes are crucial to survival. They are present in babies whose brains are developing normally and usually disappear around 4 to 5 months old. Let's take a look at some of these newborn reflexes. The rooting reflex is the newborn's response to anything that touches her cheek. When you stroke a baby's cheek, she naturally turns her head in that direction and begins to suck. The suckling reflex is the automatic, unlearned sucking motion that infants do with their mouths. Several other interesting newborn reflexes can be observed. For instance, if you put your finger into a newborn's hand, you will witness the grasping reflex, in which a baby automatically grasps anything that touches his palms. The Moro reflex is the newborn's response when she feels like she is falling. The baby spreads her arms, pulls them back in, and then usually cries. How do you think these reflexes promote survival in the first months of life? What can young infants see, hear, and smell? Newborn infants' sensory abilities are significant, but their senses are not yet fully developed. Many of a newborn's innate preference facilitates interactions with caregivers and other humans. Although vision is their least developed sense, newborns already show a preference for faces. Babies who are just a few days old also prefer human voices. They will listen to voices longer than sounds that do not involve speech. And they seem to prefer their mother's voice over a stranger's voice. In an interesting experiment, 3-week-old babies were given pacifiers that played a recording of the infant's mother's voice and of a stranger's voice. When the infants heard their mother's voices, they sucked more strongly at the pacifier. Newborns also have a strong sense of smell. For instance, newborn babies can distinguish the smell of their own mother from that of others. In a study of McFarlane, 1-week-old babies who were being breastfed were placed between 2 gauze pads. One gauze pad was from the bra of a nursing mother who was a stranger, and the other gauze pad was from the bra of the infant's own mother. More than 2/3 of the week-old babies turned towards the gauze pad with their mother's scent. Physical development. In infancy, toddlerhood, and early childhood, the body's physical development is rapid. On average, newborns weigh between 5 and 10 pounds, and a newborn's weight typically doubles in 6 months and triples in 1 year. By 2 years old, the weight will have quadrupled, so we can expect that a 2-year-old should weigh between 20 and 40 pounds. The average length of a newborn is 19.5 inches, increasing to 29.5 inches by 12 months and 34.4 inches by 2 years old. During infancy and childhood, growth does not occur in a steady rate. Growth slows between 4 and 6 years old. During this time, children gain 5 to 7 pounds and grow about 2 to 3 inches per year. Once girls reach 8 to 9 years old, their growth rate outpaces that of boys due to a pubertal growth spurt. This growth spurt continues until around 12 years old, coinciding with the start of the menstrual cycle. By 10 years old, the average girl weighs 88 pounds and the average boy weighs 85 pounds. We are born with all the brain cells that we will ever have, about 100 to 2 billion neurons whose function is to store and transmit information. However, the nervous system continues to grow and develop. Each neural pathway forms thousands of new connections during infancy and toddlerhood. This period of neural growth is called blooming. Neural pathways continue to develop through puberty. The blooming period of neural growth is then followed by a period of pruning, when neural connections are reduced. It is thought that pruning causes the brain to function more efficiently, allowing for mastery of more complex skills. Blooming occurs during the first few years of life, and pruning continues through childhood and into adolescence in various areas of the brain. The size of our brain increases rapidly. For example, the brain of a 2-year-old is 55% of its adult size, and by 6 years, the brain is about 90% of its adult size. During early childhood, the frontal lobes grow rapidly, recalling our discussion of the 4 lobes of the brain earlier in this book. The frontal lobes are associated with planning, reasoning, memory, and impulse control. Therefore, by the time children reach a school age, they are developmentally capable of controlling their attention and behavior. Through the elementary school years, the frontal, temporal, occipital, and parietal lobe all grow in size. The brain growth spurts experienced in childhood tend to follow. Paget's sequence of cognitive development, so that significant changes in neural functioning accounts for cognitive advances. Motor development occurs in orderly sequence as infants move from reflexive reactions to more advanced motor functions. For instance, babies first learn to hold their heads up, then sit with assistance, and then sit unassisted, followed later by crawling and then walking. Motor skills refer to our ability to move our bodies and manipulate objects. Fine motor skills focus on the muscles in our fingers, toes, and eyes, and enable coordination of small actions. Gross motor skill focus on large muscles that control our arms and legs and involve larger movements. As motor skills develop, there are certain developmental milestones that young children should achieve. For each milestone, there is an average age as well as range of ages in which the milestone should be reached. An example of a developmental milestone is sitting. On average, most babies sit alone at 7 months. Sitting involves both coordination and muscle strength, and 90% of babies achieve this milestone between 5 and 9 months old. In another example, babies on average are able to hold up their heads at 6 weeks old, and 90% of babies achieve this between 3 weeks and 4 months old. If a baby is not holding up his head by 4 months old, he is showing a delay. If the child is displaying delay on several milestones, that is reason for concern, and the parents or caregiver should discuss this with the child's pediatrician. Some developmental delays can be identified and addressed through early intervention. Cognitive development. In addition to rapid physical growth, young children also exhibit significant development of their cognitive abilities. Paget thought that children's abilities to understand objects, such as learning that a rattle makes a noise when shaken, was a cognitive skill that develops slowly as a child matures and interacts with the environment. Today, developmental psychologists think Paget was incorrect. Researchers have found that even very young children understand objects and how they work long before they have experience with those objects. For example, children as young as 3 months old demonstrate knowledge of the properties of objects that they had only viewed and did not have prior experience with. In one study, 3-month-old infants were shown a truck rolling down a track and behind a screen. The box, which appeared solid but was actually hollow, was placed next on the track. The truck rolled past the box as would be expected. Then the box was placed on the track to block the path of the truck. When the truck was rolled down the truck this time, it continued unimpeded. The infant spent significantly more time looking at this impossible event. Belargian concluded that they knew solid objects could not pass through each other. These findings suggest that very young children have an understanding of objects and how they work, which Paget would have said is beyond their cognitive abilities due to their limited experience in the world. Just as there are physical milestones we expect children to reach, there are also cognitive milestones. It is helpful to be aware of these milestones as children gain new abilities to think, problem solve, and communicate. For example, infants shake their head no around 6 to 9 months, and they respond to verbal requests to do things like wave bye-bye or blow a kiss around 9 to 12 months. Remember Paget's idea about object performance, so we can expect children to grasp the concept that objects continue to exist even when they are not in sight by around 8 months old. Because toddlers have mastered object performance, they enjoy games like hide and seek, and they realize that when someone leaves the room, they will come back. Toddlers also point to pictures in books and look in appropriate places when you ask them to find objects. Preschool-aged children also make steady progress in cognitive development. Not only can they count, name colors, and tell you their names and age, but they can also make some decisions on their own, such as choosing an outfit to wear. Preschool-aged children understand basic time concepts and sequencing, and they can predict what will happen next in a story. They also begin to enjoy the use of humor in stories, because they can think symbolically. They enjoy pretend play and inventing elaborate characters and scenarios. One of the most common examples of their cognitive growth is their blossoming curiosity. Preschool-aged children love to ask why. An important cognitive change occurs in children this age. Recall that Paget described 2 to 3-year-olds as egocentric, meaning that they do not have an awareness of others' points of views. Between 3 and 5 years old, children come to understand that people have thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that are different from their own. This is known as theory of mind. Children can use this skill to tease others, persuade their parents to purchase a candy bar, or understand why a sibling might be angry. When children develop theory of mind, they can recognize that others have false beliefs. Cognitive skills continue to expand in the middle and late childhood. Thought process becomes more logical and organized when dealing with concrete information. Children at this age understand concepts such as past, present, and future, giving them the ability to plan and work towards goals. Additionally, they can process complex ideas such as addition and subtraction and cause and effect relationships. However, children's attention spans tends to be very limited until they are around 11 years old. After that point, it begins to improve through adulthood. One well-researched aspect of cognitive development is language acquisition. As mentioned earlier, the order in which children learn language structure is consistent across children and cultures. We have also learned that some psychological researchers have proposed that children possess a biological predisposition for language acquisition. Starting before birth, babies begin to develop language and communication skills. At birth, babies apparently recognize their mother's voice and can discriminate between the languages spoken by their mother and foreign languages, and they show preferences for faces that are moving in synchrony with audible language. Children communicate information through gesturing long before they speak, and there is some evidence that gesture usage predicts subsequent language developments. In terms of producing spoken language, babies begin to coo almost immediately. Cooing is one-syllable combinations of a consonant and a vowel sound. Interestingly, babies replicate sounds from their own language. A baby whose parents speak French will coo in a different tone than a baby whose parents speak Spanish or Urdu. After cooing, the baby starts to babble. Babbling begins with repeating a syllable such as mama, dada, or baba. When a baby is about 12 months old, we expect her to say her first word for meaning and to start combining words for meaning at about 18 months. At about 2 years old, a toddler uses between 50 and 200 words. By 3-year-olds, they have a vocabulary of up to 1,000 words and can speak in sentences. During the early childhood years, children's vocabulary increases at a rapid pace. This is sometimes referred to as vocabulary spurt and has been claimed to involve an expansion in vocabulary at a rate of 10 to 20 new words per week. Recent research may indicate that while some children experience these spurts, it is far from universal. It has been estimated that 5-year-olds understand about 6,000 words, speak 2,000 words, and can define words and question their meanings. They can rhyme and name the days of the week. 7-year-olds speak fluently and use slang and cliches. What accounts for such dramatic language learning by children? Behaviorist B.F. Skinner thought that we learn language in response to reinforcements or feedback, such as through prenatal approval or through being understood, parental approval or through being understood. For example, when a 2-year-old child asks for juice, he might say, "Me, juice," to which his mother might respond by giving him a cup of apple juice. Noam Chomsky criticized Skinner's theory and proposed that we are all born with an innate capacity to learn language. Chomsky called this mechanism a language acquisition device. Who was correct? Both Chomsky and Skinner are correct. Remember that we are products of both nature and nurture. Research now believes that language acquisitions is partially inborn and partially learned through our interactions with our linguistics environment. Attachment. Psychosocial development occurs as children form relationships, interact with others, and understand and manage their feelings in social and emotional development. Forming healthy attachments is very important and is the major milestone in infancy. Attachments is a long-standing connection or bond with others. Developmental psychologists are interested in how infants reach this milestone. They ask such questions as, how do parents and infants' attachment bonds form? How does neglect affect these bonds? What accounts for children's attachments? What accounts for children's attachment differences? Researchers Harry Harlow, John Bowlby, and Mary Ainsworth conducted studies designed to answer these questions. In the 1950s, Harlow conducted a series of experiments on monkeys. He separated newborn monkeys from their mothers. Each monkey was presented with 2 surrogate mothers. One surrogate monkey was made out of wire mesh and she could dispense milk. The other monkey was softer and made from cloth. This monkey did not dispense milk. Research shows that the monkey preferred the soft, cuddly cloth monkey, even though she did not provide any nourishment. The baby monkeys spent their time clinging to the cloth monkey and only went to the wire monkey when they needed to be fed. Prior to this study, the medical and scientific communities generally thought that babies became attached to the people who provided their nourishment. However, Harlow concluded that there was more to the mother-child bond than nourishment. Feelings of comfort and security are the critical components to maternal-infant bonding, which leads to healthy psychosocial development. Building on the work of Harlow and others, John Bowlby developed the concept of attachment theory. He defined attachment as the affectional bond or tie that an infant forms with the mother. An infant must form the bond with a primary caregiver in order to have normal social and emotional development. In addition, Bowlby proposed that this attachment bond is very powerful and continues throughout life. He used the concept of secure base to define a healthy attachment between parent and child. A secure base is a parental presence that gives the child a sense of safety as he explores his surroundings. Bowlby said that 2 things are needed for healthy attachment. The caregiver must be responsive to the child's physical, social, and emotional needs, and the caregiver and child must engage in mutually enjoyable interactions. While Bowlby thought attachment was an all-or-nothing process, Mary Ainsworth's research showed otherwise. Ainsworth wanted to know if children differ in the ways they bond, and if so, why. To find the answer, she used the strange situation procedure to study attachments between mother and their infants. If the stranger situation, the mother or primary giver, and the infant, ages 12 to 18 months, are placed in a room together. There are toys in the room, and the caregiver and child spend time alone in the room. After the child has had time to explore her surroundings, a stranger enters the room. The mother then leaves her baby with the stranger. After a few minutes, she returns to comfort her child. Based on how the infant toddler responded to the separation and reunion, Ainsworth identified 3 types of parent-children attachment: secure, avoidant, and resistant. A 4th style known as disorganized attachment was later described. The most common type of attachment, also considered the healthiest, is called secure attachment. In this type of attachment, the toddler prefers his parent over a stranger. The attachment figure is used as a secure base to explore the environment and is sought out in times of stress. Securely attached children were distressed when their caregiver left the room in the strange situation and experiment. But when their caregiver returned, the securely attached children were happy to see them. Securely attached children have caregivers who are sensitive and responsive to their needs. With avoidant attachment, the child is unresponsive to the parent, does not use the parent as a secure base, and does not care if the parent leaves. The toddler reacts to the parent the same way he reacts to the stranger. When the parent does return, the child is slow to show a positive reaction. Ainsworth theorized that these children were most likely to have a caregiver who was insensitive or inattentive to their needs. In case of resistant attachment, children tend to show clingy behavior, but then they reject the attachment figure attempt. They reject the attachment figure's attempts to interact with them. These children do not explore the toys in the room as they are too fearful. During separation in the strange situation, they become extremely disturbed and angry with the parent. When the parent returns, the children are difficult to comfort. Resistant attachment is the result of the caregiver's inconsistent levels of response to their child. Finally, children with disorganized attachment behave oddly in the stranger situation. They freeze, run around the room in an erratic manner, and try to run away when the caregiver returns. This type of attachment is seen most often in kids who have been abused. Research has shown that abuse disrupts a child's ability to regulate their emotions. While Ainsworth research has found support in subsequent studies, it has also met criticism. Some researchers have pointed out that a child's temperament may have a strong influence on attachment, and others have noted that attachment varies from culture to culture, a factor not accounted for in Ainsworth research. Self-concept. Just as attachment is the main psychosocial milestone in infancy, the primary psychosocial milestone in childhood is the development of a positive sense of self. How does self-awareness develop? Infants don't have a self-concept, which is an understanding of who they are. If you place a baby in front of a mirror, she will reach out to touch her image, thinking it's another baby. However, by about 18 months, a toddler will recognize that the person in the mirror is herself. How do we know this? In a well-known experiment, a researcher placed a red dot of paint on children's noses before putting them in front of a mirror, commonly known as the mirror test. This behavior is demonstrated by humans and a few other species and is considered evidence of self-recognition. At 18 months old, they would touch their nose when they saw the paint, surprised to see a spot on their face. By 24 to 36-month-old children can name and or point to themselves in pictures, clearly indicating self-recognition. Children from 2 to 4 years old display a great increase in social behavior. Once they have established a self-concept, They enjoy playing with other children, but they have difficulty sharing their possessions. Also, through play, children explore and come to understand their gender roles and can label themselves as a girl or boy. By 4-year-olds, children can cooperate with other children, share when asked, and separate from parent with little anxiety. Children at this age also exhibit autonomy, initiate tasks, and carry out plans. Success in these areas contribute to a positive sense of self. Once children reach 6 years old, they can identify themselves in terms of group membership. A first grader. School-age children compare themselves to their peers and discover that they are competent in some areas and less so in others. At this age, children recognize their own personality traits as well as some other traits they would like to have. For example, 10-year-old Layla says, "I'm kind of shy. I wish I could be more talkative like my friend Alexa." Development of a positive self-concept is important to healthy development. Children with a positive self-concept tend to be more confident, do better in school, act more independently, and are more willing to try new activities. Formation of a positive self-concept begins in Erickson's toddlerhood stage, when children establish autonomy and become confident in their abilities. Development of self-concept continues in elementary school, when children compare themselves to others. When the comparison is favorable, children feel a sense of competence and are motivated to work hard and accomplish more. Self-concept is re-evaluated in Erickson's adolescent stage. As teens form an identity, they internalize the message they have received regarding their strengths and weaknesses, keeping some messages and rejecting others. Adolescents who have achieved identity formation are capable of contributing positively to society. What can parents do to nurture a healthy self-concept? Diane Boomrind thinks parenting styles may be a factor. The way we parent is an important factor in a child's socio-emotional growth. Baumrind developed a refined a theory describing 4 parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. With the authoritative style, the parent gives reasonable demands and consistent limits, expresses warmth and affection, and listens to the child's point of view. Parents set rules and explain the reasons behind them. They are also flexible and willing to make exceptions to the rules in certain cases. For example, temporarily relaxing bedtime rules to allow for a nighttime swim during a family vacation. Of the 4 parenting styles, the authoritative style is the one that is most encouraged in modern American society. American children raised by authoritative parents tend to have high self-esteem and social skills. However, effective parenting styles vary as a function of culture, and as Small points out, the authoritative style is not necessarily preferred or appropriate in all cultures. In authoritarian style, the parents places high value on conformity and obedience. The parents are often strict, tightly monitor their children, and express little warmth. In contrast to the authoritative style, authoritarian parents probably would not relax bedtime rules during a vacation because they consider the rules to be set and they expect obedience. This style can create anxious, withdrawn, and unhappy kids. However, it is important to point out that the authoritarian parenting is as beneficial as the authoritative parenting in some ethnic groups. For instance, first-generation Chinese children raised by authoritarian parents did just as well in school as their peers who were raised by authoritative parents. For parents who employ the permissive style of parenting, the kids run the show and anything goes. Permissive parents make few demands and rarely use punishments. They tend to be very nurturing and loving and may play the role of friends rather than parents. In terms of our examples of vacation bedtime, permissive parents may not have bedtime rules at all. Instead, They allow the children to choose his bedtime and whether on vacation or not. Not surprisingly, children raised by permissive parents tend to lack self-discipline, and the permissive parenting style is negatively associated with grades. The permissive style may also contribute to other risky behaviors such as alcohol abuse, risky sexual behavior, especially among female children, and increased display of disruptive behaviors by male children. However, there are some positive outcomes associated with children raised by permissive parents. They tend to have higher self-esteem, better social skills, and report lower levels of depression. With the uninvolved style of parenting, the parents are indifferent, uninvolved, and sometimes referred to as neglectful. They don't respond to the child's needs and make relatively few demands. This could be because of severe depression or substance abuse or other factors such as the parent's extreme focus on work. These parents may provide for the child's basic needs, but little else. The children raised in this parenting style are usually emotionally withdrawn, fearful, anxious, performing poorly in school, and are at an increased risk of substance abuse. As you can see, parenting styles influence childhood adjustments, but could a child's temperament likewise influence parenting? Temperament refers to innate traits that influence how one thinks, behaves, and reacts with the environment. Children with ease temperaments demonstrate positive emotions, adapt well to change, and are capable of regulating their emotions. Conversely, children with difficult temperaments demonstrate negative emotions and have difficulty adapting to change and regulating their emotions. Difficult children are more likely to challenge parents, teachers, and other caregivers. Therefore, it is possible that easy children tend to elicit warm and responsive parenting, while demanding, irritable, withdrawn children evoke irritation in their parents or cause their parents to withdraw. Adolescence. Adolescence is a socially constructed concept in pre-industrial society. Children were considered adults when they reached physical maturity, but today we have an extended time between childhood and adulthood called adolescence. Adolescence is the period of development that begins at puberty and ends at emerging adulthood, which is discussed later. In the U.S., adolescence is seen as a time to develop independence from parents while remaining connected to them. The typical age range of adolescence is from 12 to 18 years, and this stage of development also has some predictable physical, cognitive, and psychosocial milestones. Physical development. As noted above, adolescents begin with puberty. While the sequence of physical changes in puberty is predictable, the onset and pace of puberty vary widely. Several physical changes occur during puberty, such as adrenarche and gonadarche, the maturing of their adrenal glands and sex glands, respectively. Also, during this time, primary and secondary sexual characteristics develop and mature. Primary sexual characteristics are organs specifically needed for reproduction, like the uterus and ovaries in females and testes in males. Secondary sexual characteristics are physical signs of sexual maturation that do not directly involve sex organs, such as development of breasts and hips in girls, and development of facial hair and deepened voices in boys. Girls experience menarche, the beginning of menstrual period, usually around 12 to 13 years old, and boys experience spermarche, the first ejaculation, around 13 to 14 years old. During puberty, both sexes experience a rapid increase in height. For girls, this begins between 8 and 13 years old, with adult height reached between 10 and 16 years old. Boys begin their growth spurt slightly later, usually between 10 and 16, and reach their adult heights between 13 and 17. Both nature and nurture can influence height. Because rates of physical development vary so widely among teenagers, puberty can be a source of pride or embarrassment. Early maturing boys tend to be stronger, taller, and more athletic than the later maturing peers. They are usually more popular, confident, and independent, but they are also at greater risk for substance abuse and early sexual activity. Early maturing girls may be teased or overly admired, which can cause them to feel self-conscious about their developing bodies. And these girls are at higher risk for depression, substance abuse, and eating disorder. Late blooming boys and girls may feel self-conscious about their lack of physical development. Negative feelings are particularly a problem for late maturing boys who are at a higher risk for depression and conflict with parents. The adolescent brain also remains under development. Up until puberty, brain cells continue to bloom in the frontal region. Adolescents engage in increased risk-taking behaviors and emotional outbursts, possibly because the frontal lobes of their brains are still developing. Recall that this area is responsible for judgment, impulse control, and planning, and it is still maturing into early adulthood. Cognitive development. More complex thinking abilities emerge during adolescence. Some researchers suggest this is due to increase in processing speed and efficiency rather than as the adults of an increase in mental capacity. In other words, due to improvements in existing skills rather than development of new ones. During adolescence, teenagers move beyond concrete thinking and become capable of abstract thought. Recall that Paget refers to this stage as formal operational thought. Teen thinking is also characterized by the ability to consider multiple points of views. Imagine hypothetical situations, debate ideas and opinions, and form new ideas. In addition, it is uncommon for adolescents to question authority or challenge established societal norms. Cognitive empathy, also known as theory of mind, relates to the ability to take the perspective of others and feel concern for others. Cognitive empathy begins to increase in adolescence and is an important component of social problem solving and conflict avoidance. According to one longitudinal study, levels of cognitive empathy begin rising in girls around 13 years old and around 15 years old in boys. Teens who reported having supportive fathers with whom they could discuss their worries were found to be better able to take the perspective of others. Psychosocial development. Adolescents continue to refine their sense of self as they relate to others. Erikson referred to the task of the adolescent as one of the identities versus role confusion. Thus, in Erikson's view, an adolescent's main questions are who am I and who do I want to be? Some adolescents adopt the values and roles that their parents expect for them. Other teens develop identities that are in opposition to their parents but align with a peer group. This is common as peer relationships become a central focus in adolescent lives. And adolescents work to form their identities they pull away from their parents, and the peer group becomes very important. Despite spending less time with their parents, most teens report positive feelings towards them. Warm and healthy parent-child relationships have been associated with positive child outcomes such as better grades and fewer school behavioral problems in the U.S. as well as other countries. It appears that most teens don't experience adolescence storm and stress to the degree once famously suggested by G. Stanley Hall, a pioneer in the study of adolescent development. Only small numbers of teens have major conflicts with their parents, and most disagreements are minor. For example, in a study of 1,800 parents of adolescents from various culture and ethnic groups, Barber found that conflict occurred over day-to-day issues such as homework, money, curfews, clothing, chores, and friends. These types of arguments tend to decrease as teens develop. Emerging adulthood. The next stage of development is emerging adulthood. This is a relatively newly defined period of lifespan development spanning from 18 years old to the mid-20s, characterized as an in-between time where identity exploration is focused on work and love. When does a person become an adult? There are many ways to answer this question. In the US, you are legally considered an adult at 18 years old, but other definitions of adulthood vary widely. In sociology, for example, a person may be considered an adult when she becomes self-supporting, chooses a career, gets married, or starts a family. The ages at which we achieve these milestones vary from person to person as well as from culture to culture. For example, in the African country of Malawi, 15-year-old Jamail was married at 14 years old and had her first child at 15. In her culture, she's considered an adult. Children in Malawi take on adult responsibilities such as marriage and work as early as 10 years old. In stark contrast, independence in Western culture is taking longer and longer, effectively delaying the onset of adult life. Why is it taking 20-somethings so long to grow up? It seems that emerging adulthood is a product of both Western culture and our current times. People in developed countries are living longer, allowing the freedom to take an extra decade to start a career and family. Changes in the workforce also play a role. For example, 50 years ago, a young adult with a high school diploma could immediately enter the workforce and climb the corporate ladder. That is no longer the case. Bachelor's and even graduate degrees are required more and more often, even for entry-level jobs. In addition, many students are taking longer to complete a college degree as a result of working and going to school at the same time. After graduating, many young adults return to the family home because they have difficulty finding a job. Changing culture expectations may be the most important reason for the delay in entering adult roles. Young people are spending more time exploring their options, so they are delaying marriage and work as they change majors and jobs multiple times, putting them on a much later timetable than their parents. Adulthood. Adulthood begins around 20 years old and has 3 distinct stages: early, middle, and late. Each stage brings its own set of rewards and challenges. Physical development. By the time we reach early adulthood, our physical maturation is complete. Although our height and weight may increase slightly, in young adulthood our physical abilities are at their peak, including muscle strength, reaction time, sensory ability, and cardiac functioning. Most professional athletes are at the top of their game during this stage. Many women have children in the young adulthood years, so they may see additional weight gain and breast changes. Middle adulthood extends from 40s to their 60s. Physical decline is gradual. The skin loses some elasticity and wrinkles are among the first signs of aging. Visual acuity decreases during this time. Women experience a gradual decline in fertility as they approach the onset of menopause, the end of the menstrual cycle around 50 years old. Both men and women tend to gain weight in the abdominal area for men and in the hips and thighs for women. Hair begins to thin and turn gray. Later adulthood is considered to extend from the 60s on. This is the last stage of physical range. The skin continues to lose elasticity. Reactions time slows further and muscle strength diminishes. Smell, taste, hearing, and vision, so sharp in our 20s, decline significantly. The brain may also no longer function at optimal levels, leading to problems like memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease in later years. Cognitive development. Because we spend so many years in adulthood, cognitive changes are numerous. In fact, research suggests that adult cognitive development is a complex, ever-changing process that may be even more active than cognitive development in infancy and early childhood. Unlike our physical abilities, which peak in our mid-20s, and then begin a slow decline, our cognitive abilities remain steadily throughout early and middle adulthood. Our crystallized intelligence tends to hold a steady as we age. It may even improve. For example, adults show relatively stable to increasing scores on intelligence tests in their mid-30s to mid-50s. However, in late adulthood, we begin to experience a decline in another area of our cognitive abilities, fluid intelligence. These processes become slower. However, how can we delay the onset of cognitive decline? Mental and physical activity seems to play a part. Research has found adults who engage in mentally and physically stimulating activities experience less cognitive decline and have a reduced incidence of mild cognitive impairment and dementia. Psychosocial development. There are many theories about the social and emotional aspects of aging. Some aspects of healthy aging include activities, social connectedness, and the role of a person's culture. According to many theorists, including George Valiant, who studied and analyzed over 50 years of data, we need to have and continue to find meaning throughout our lives. For those in early and middle adulthood, meanings is found through work and family life. These areas relate to the tasks that Erickson referred to as generativity and intimacy. As mentioned previously, adults tend to define themselves by what they do. Their careers, earnings peak during this time, yet job satisfaction is more closely tied to work that involves contact with other people. Is interesting, provides opportunities for advancement, and allows some independence. And that it is to salary. How might being unemployed or being in a dead-end job challenge adult well-being? Positive relationships with significant others in adult years have been found to contribute to a state of well-being. Most adults in the U.S. identify themselves through their relationship with families, particularly with spouse, children, and parents. While raising children can be stressful, especially when they are young, research suggests that parents reap the reward down the road. As adults, children tend to have a positive effect on parental well-being. Having a stable marriage has also been found to contribute to well-being throughout adulthood. Although aspects of positive aging is believed to be social connectedness and social support. As we get older, social-emotional selectivity theories suggest that our social support and friendship dwindle in number, but remain as close, if not more close, than in our earlier years.